That's all I'm having to say. Technique is not a band-aid, right? It works in parallel to our training forever to keep the connections tight. So today is going to be how to know, or how do you know whether you need to be working strength or technique, or is that important at all? This is from Yash Naughty 11, getting after it with the question. Let's dive into it. I think that's all it's left to do. Strength or technique? I'm going to start off by kind of addressing this big giant elephant in the room. Is technique is always the case, meaning I don't care if you're brand new to jumping or if you are the most talented leaper in the world. We have something to benefit from working technique. The same way that our favorite, as if we all have favorite, but weightlifters at the highest levels of the world, right? The clean and jerk and the snatch work elements of technique all the way down to working it with a PVC pipe or an empty barbell. They do that until they are competing at the Olympics. So what makes a jumper think that we can omit technique where one of the other kind of more talented power athletes in the world is utilizing technical intervention on a weekly basis? That's all I'm having to say. Technique is not a band-aid, right? It works in parallel to our training forever to keep the connections tight. So how do I know if I need to be working strength? I would say it's safe to bet that every athlete to a degree needs to work on strength. Now, just because you are strong, I just had this conversation with my man Mike behind the camera, just because you're strong doesn't mean you're going to jump high, right? Because there are very unique forces at play in jumping. Whether we're jumping 2 feet or whether we're jumping 1 foot, the forces that are acting on our body and the force that our body needs to elicit into the ground is unique to that experience. A lot of rotational, a lot of shearing, a lot of high kind of neural output, which means how fast our nervous system is sending signals. And when it comes to general strength work, right, moving through squats and lunges and presses and pulls, we're not always favoring the amount of velocity or speed required to benefit jumping. It's a long-winded way of saying technique is something that always kind of presents alongside strength, and strength is something that is required but is not necessarily, how would you say it? Not necessarily required all the time? There we go, not necessarily required all the time, right? So we can go through strength phases, remove that, and then work technique, work plyometric outputs, work power outputs in the absence of traditional strength work. Another way that we can look at whether or not strength or technique is an issue for you is taking a look at the discrepancy between your standing counter movement jump and your full approach jump. And if we have a kind of a low discrepancy, if we have a very kind of minimal margin between the two, it's a very safe assumption to say that your technique is lacking, because when we give you some additional variables, right? Speed, now you have an approach, and it's not helping the output on the top end, it's likely that there's some inefficiencies at play with how you're transitioning that speed through takeoff. Okay, it's not to say that it's all technique, because there will be additional strength and resiliency required to support the new speed. However, we can gain a lot from the technique at play. Now, we've introduced technique interventions at the beginner level and all the way to the professional level and seen results with everybody. So it's not that the better you get at jumping, the less you have to care about technique. It might be that the less you need to touch technique during any given week, right? But even when I was competing as a pro dunker, same with my colleague, Coach Chase, I can still remember going out to dunk practices and dunk sessions, and during warm-ups, just working through elements of rhythm and connectedness to make sure my body was firing and nice and synergistic, right? Nice and together. Because when we're disjointed, when things are moving when they shouldn't be or not moving when they should be, is when we find a lot of this kind of disconnect and wasted energy and all this garbage that happens on the outside. So I'm not sure if that was helpful at all. I think it was, right? Moral of the story is technique's not a band-aid. It should be worked all the time through your training from beginning to the end of your career, which I hope is never. And strength is something that you should touch multiple times as well, but doesn't necessarily need to be in play at all times. Does that make sense? Mike, what do you think? Make sense? makes sense. Sometimes I get going, as you can tell. Big thumbs up from Mikey behind the camera. But sometimes I get going and you know, I forget what I say, right? I'm not perfect. If I left out something that you want more clarification on, well, put it down below. And if I said something that you didn't understand, do the same. Just type stuff down below if you got something on your mind. Hit the thumbs up, put the bell, do the things, and become part of our community, family. Hey, COVID high five. Here we go. Ready?